driving experience.
Indeed. Welcome, welcome. My name is Selena Layel, and I am a coach here with Wellness Coach. It is my pleasure to be hosting a panel today with Dr. Eric Frazer, one of our expert coaches here, on reducing churn and hiring top talent. So hello and welcome to you, Eric.
Thank you. Delighted to be back.
Yes, wonderful. So as a reminder, if you're joining us on the app, this is an interactive panel. Dr. Eric would love to hear from you. Any questions that you have, anything you'd like to share on this topic. And you can do that by way of sending a comment or a question in the chat box, the Q&A feature, or clicking on the hand symbol to actually be unmuted so you can speak with Dr. Eric directly. So, and if you're on YouTube, welcome, welcome. We cannot actually interact with you from YouTube. However, you can download the Wellness Coach app in the Google Play Store or the Apple App Store. Okay, Dr. Eric, would you like to bring us in with a practice of some kind?
Yes, so today I have a slightly different meditation, and but we'll start the same way that we always do, or at least the way that I like to start, which is really just getting into a relaxed state, like just disconnecting a minute from everything that's happened so far today. So I'll invite everyone to just get comfortable wherever you're sitting, wherever you're hanging out right now, and just gently close your eyes. Just let your eyelids just kind of hang loose and just relax and start to notice your breath, your breathing. Just notice it going in, going out. Try to lengthen it a little bit if you can, just slow it down. It's interesting how slow breathing in through the nose and out through the mouth gives an opportunity to calm the body. Very, very gently relax the body down. And just breathe in and breathe out in that relaxed way. And I'm going to invite you to ponder a thought as you breathe in at your own pace and breathe out at your own pace. And the thought is this: reflect on this. Don't ask the world to change first. You change first. The concept of change. And as you're breathing in and thinking about change, I invite you to think about the change that you want. And I'll go through a couple ideas to breathe on. Perhaps there's something that you wish to change about your wellness. Maybe there's something that you want to change in a relationship. Maybe there's something that you want to change about your attitude, or stated differently, your mind frame. And another way, finally, to think about change is a concept that Rumi taught about in one of his sayings, which is change is a form of seeking. And maybe ask yourself, what am I seeking? And a way to flip that around is to consider the notion that what you are seeking is also seeking you. Just breathe in 2 or 3 more times and out 3 more times, reflecting on how you want to be the change. And what you are seeking may be seeking you. When you finish that, just feel free to relax your eyes back open and join us here in the present moment. And maybe afterwards, after today's session or tonight, when you're going back through your day, go back to that question about seeking and change and do some journaling about it.
Thank you. So much wisdom in that, so many opportunities to really deepen the way that we think about change, and rather than it being the world that needs to change, focusing from that inner place of change first. It's powerful. Thank you. And we would love to hear from you. How was that practice for you? Feel free to drop something in the chat or the Q&A. Okay, so let's dive into this topic. Paul, for those of us who are unfamiliar with the term churn, can you give us an idea of what that means, and also how businesses can refocus their efforts to create more success?
Yes, so churn, this is a hot topic conversation. And churn is essentially when people, employees, of course, are exiting the company voluntarily, right? And this is a ubiquitous problem. It's a really big problem today. Even more so, there's a lot of conversations coming up with younger employees that they're onboarding, and then they're suddenly exiting unexpectedly. And today we'll get into a lot of the details about that and what one can do about that and how to solve that and how to recruit better. But this is what churn is. And it really, I'm going to start with a story. So I was consulting to an organization that was a mining company, and they were experiencing this churn problem. They were having their top performers who had been with the company for a significant period of time suddenly start exiting. And then there was also some younger, newer employees onboarding, and they were exiting prematurely. So it wasn't for legitimate reasons like a change in location or family circumstance or a termination for cause or things like that, some of these technical HR words. And the way that I approached this was I took a look at the mission statement of the company and some of the core values of the company. And while I was doing that and doing my research with the organization and doing some interviewing of the C-suite folks who were really concerned about making a strategic change, my point of contact person was the Chief Human Resources Officer. And paradoxically, right as this consultation engagement began, the CHRO quit unexpectedly. Right? So it was really like the problem was right in your face. Fast forward, what we really got to was a problem that is very common, which is a misalignment. And the misalignment is with the company's core values and being able to effectuate those core values. In other words, living up to the promise. So when I was reading this organization's core values and their mission statement with respect to onboarding top talent and their quote unquote promise, okay, it was really conveying the message with specific words like, we value our people, we invest in personal development, we nurture professional development. So if I was reading that, this was, hey, this is a great organization to work with. They're a people first organization. I'm feeling very aligned with this because this is consistent with my core values. And this is what I'm seeking from an organization. And what I learned afterwards is that they weren't living up to that promise, right? They were not providing people resources. They were not providing personalized professional development. Leadership track was for a select few. Resources were limited and not equitably distributed across the organization. And people essentially weren't happy, right? So when people are unhappy, they start looking for a new opportunity where they feel more aligned. So the first key insight from the analysis of this organization, which I've seen across many organizations, is the alignment between the core values of the organization, and then the delivery of the promise to empower your top talent people, because they are seeking that, right? So back to our meditation today about seeking, I had a great message sent to me this morning from someone on LinkedIn who came across an article that I was interviewed on, and this was someone who flat out said, you know, hey, I'm a hard worker. I'm really committed to my professional development. I came across this article, it was really inspiring, and I'm gonna just download your book. And again, this is a great example of someone who is just a rock star in what they do, but they're feeling unfulfilled in some capacity, right? They're seeking more. And the companies that are able to deliver that, right? And to have a relationship with this person, so that this person has a relationship with someone in their organization where they can sit down and have a conversation about their professional development and about what they are seeking for their leadership. That is the key missing component. That is the X factor that allows people to stick with companies and feel aligned with them.
Great. Very clear picture painted. Thank you for that. Let's switch gears a little bit and move on to the top talent portion of our session today. I would love to hear, what qualities and behaviors should employers look for when they are searching for top talent?
Yep. So that's a great question. You know, everybody asks that question. They come at it from a slightly different angle. But where we're at right now is we have what are called psychological competencies, okay? It can be interchanged with a more familiar word, conversationally speaking, emotional intelligence. What I want to point out is that there are proven psychological competencies. There are attributes, there are personality traits, there are behaviors, there are emotional states, there are cognitive strategies that are psychological competencies that people possess that have been proven through the research that these are people who are high performers, right? So then the crossover comes into being able to capture those. I always love referencing a great study that was done a ways back, but it focused on this group called the Beyonders, right? And I always, after having a conversation about this, ask people and invite them to say, you know, are you a Beyonder? And if you are, why? But the study was a longitudinal study, and it looked at the successful factors associated with these people. Success was not defined monetarily. It was defined across many, many variables. You know, their satisfaction with their life, how they perceive themselves at work with their performance, how they perceive the relationships with coworkers. And it looked at many, many variables. And it derived a lot of the factors that have morphed into many, many different kinds of psychological terms these days, but the concepts have stood the test of time. So one was, you know, a love of learning, right? And now, you know, a lot of us talk about that in terms of growth mindset, right? So having a passion for learning, having high energy, okay? You know, if you're enthusiastic, you're motivated, you come to work with high energy, but the high energy isn't just associated with work. The high energy is associated with just a way of life, right? Like a lifestyle, like really being enthusiastic. And we were talking earlier about having, you know, a bowl with 2 big scoops of life on your plate every single day. You know, are you one of those people? And if you're missing that, you know, what snuff that candle out? And then getting into other concepts like being a minority of one thinker, right? Where we get into this concept of diversity, right? Having diverse thinking, right? Being able to take a counterpoint of view. And the diversity can take many, many forms, right? But that diversity is really what CEOs and leaders are looking for in their leadership team. They don't want someone who's just going to say yes or agree, to have group consensus. They want someone to push back, to challenge hypotheses, and really engage in what we've talked about in other classes, you know, being able to solve complex problems these days. So these are, you know, a number of the attributes that, and there's many, but it's important to really have a structure around this. And hopefully we'll get into this shortly in the conversation, or maybe the next part here, but having a structure around these, because without the structure, it becomes difficult to know if you're actually capturing those top talent features, those top talent qualities. And it all boils down to asking the right question to understand and appreciate and perceive and assess if that candidate truly has those qualities and attributes that you're looking for. A lot of organizations know what they want. They can sort of have this conversation and sit down and in a strategy session and say that. It's the execution of that, right? And that where there's some friction and some struggle and some inconsistency in being able to use those psychological competencies and capture them in a recruiting and a hiring process.
Great. Let's talk a little bit more about that. How can employers identify these top qualities in a credible way during the recruiting process?
Yep. So there's a lot of organizations that have a great quote unquote system in place in print. What I hear from a lot of organizations that are involved in this is that they're not using their system, right? They have instruments and assessment tools. We're shifting into a world where that's going to become more AI, artificial intelligence, and driven by AI systematic features to try to narrow down the candidates with those factors. They have protocols for implementing interviews. And the reality is, at the end of the day, those systems aren't being followed, or they're not being followed in a standardized way. So what's happening is, you start off with maybe one or two questions from the interview protocol that's in place to kind of capture these psychological competencies and top talent attributes. But then, the conversation shifts and there's sort of a departure from that structure. And then it just becomes more old-fashioned, meaning gut instinct, right? And when you have two or three interviewers and they sit down, they get together and say, well, what do you think of this person? What do you think of that person? And these softer kinds of non-structured, non-standardized conversations, they're losing. The problem is you're losing the science behind the methodology that so much resource and effort went into doing. Okay. So that's a sort of a broad brush global way to describe some of the observations and feedback that I've seen in organizations where they're struggling. Now, where do we go from there? There's a great model in psychology that we call utilizing structured professional judgment, and we always use the acronym SPJ. And what it really means is that we're using an interview format, and it's structured and it's professional judgment because it's a combination of research and experience, right? The research part comes from concepts like mindfulness, concepts like grit, concepts like growth mindset, concepts like curiosity, which are proven psychological factors that correlate strongly with successful outcomes in top talent people, right? The experience comes into using those concepts and developing standardized questions that you can have a quantitative score at the end of an interview and making a determination if these traits are in fact present or absent, right? And then you can do a cross analysis, okay? Simple analysis of candidate A versus B versus C versus D, and then have that softer conversation that maybe has some more experiential feedback, that maybe has some more process feedback, some instinctual feedback, but really using a structured methodology to capture these proven competencies is a way to add precision to the process that's lacking, right? It goes back to solving the problem of, well, why did this person leave? Or why didn't we, why did we make this hire and then this hire didn't work out? And if you reverse engineer, the process, and you go back and you look at how were we actually tapping the psychological competencies that we were seeking, we find that there were some glitches in the process. Okay, so that's a very broad brush way of implementing the system. If you have a system in place already, then the feedback would be to maybe review it, right? And look exactly at the core competencies that you are trying to capture. Maybe it needs to be updated, okay? Maybe your questions need to be updated. Maybe there's too much transparency in your questions. Sometimes it's asking people questions about experiences that elicit the responses that inform you about their top talent qualities. So for example, you could say, what is one of the greatest accomplishments in your life outside of your work experience that you're proudest of, right? In that kind of question, you're invoking them to tell you about something that mattered to them. You're invoking a question that queries about their level of effort, their love of work, their high energy, right? How they overcame obstacles and challenges, and also concepts like grit, like how long did it take them to complete that goal, right? I remember an interview with someone who told me about a musical performance that they engaged in. It took them years to master the piece that they were practicing for, right? So then it gets back to, this concept of, practice and deliberate practice toward long-term goals. And that was a very informative way to understand that person's growth mindset and their positive work habits that really informed about that particular psychological competency. So that's, it's helpful to get very creative with these concepts, but to use these proven competencies, as anchors for your interview process to onboard the right people. And then finally, I just want to say one thing about, psychological tests and instruments, because that's an area of my expertise. A lot of people, still utilize this notion about, the big five personality and, other 360-degree, types of instruments. And I want to point out that there's significant limitations to psychological tests and instruments. The big five was not standardized and developed around millennials and Gen Z workers who are coming into the workforce. So by applying an instrument that isn't referenced amongst those people is not going to give you data. It's like that old saying, garbage in, garbage out, right? And it also wasn't necessarily an instrument that was developed around the notion of top talent and psychological competencies and things like that. So some limitations to keep in mind if those are instruments that you're using in your hiring and recruiting process.
Thank you. Such a well-rounded answer with just many very clear steps to take. So thank you for that. We are just a little past the 20-minute mark. However, I'd love to ask one more question and then we can bring it to a close. So this feels like an important addition to what you've just been speaking to. How can employers really nurture top talent with their current employees?
Yep. So again, this is really what closes the loop of the top talent circle, if you will, in terms of onboarding and keeping, right? So it's how do we hire, how do we develop, how do we retain, right? That's the way that I like to think about it. And the retention process and the development process really go hand in hand. They're complementary in many, many ways. And one of the most important interventions that you can give is what I like to call personalized feedback, right? So the old performance development meetings and performance review meetings that happen on a quarterly basis or a biannual basis, or in some organizations still on an annual basis, we're really departing from that model. And the model that we're shifting into that's more effective is having agile, dynamic feedback that's personalized, right? So if you're working with someone and you want to give them a compliment about a particular project or a particular task or objective that was fulfilled, it's important to give that feedback. We call it good old-fashioned behavioral reinforcement, right? It has a greater impact if you deliver it in a moment versus delivering it 90 days later at the quarterly review meeting, right? Similarly, if there's an area for growth or a missed opportunity, again, it's really great just to have a very casual, empathic conversation to help that person maybe see a blind spot and then assist them by giving them the resources or knowledge or a learning tool or a mentoring opportunity to sort of reclaim that and help them along their own leadership track. So that's a specific example of an up and coming and an ongoing trend. And then there's these other soft touch kinds of experiences within organizations amongst coworkers where you can have team building events, right, which are really important. And team building events done with a facilitator can have a really important impact by sort of neutralizing some of the conflict in the air, so that there's a third person objective party in the process who can give feedback and point out different dynamics within the group, and do it in a way that's empathic and encouraging and nurturing and sort of growth promoting. So that's an important opportunity that organizations can have in the development process. And then last but not least, what I was sort of alluding to earlier, you know, the younger workers, and even current ones, but the younger workers, I make reference to them because there's a lot of articles written about them. I've talked about it at length. You know, they are really seeking, again, back to the seeking from earlier, they're seeking mentoring opportunities. You know, they want to be mentored. They want to be a part of the corporate conversation and part of the corporate culture where they feel that their voice matters and that they are connected to the mattering, you know, of the core values of the organization. Presumably, that's why they onboarded in the first place. And then, of course, you know, the coaching experiences, like giving your workers coaching experiences so that they can, you know, have some fine tuning done along their course of life and their professional development. Really important, whether it's internal or external, not just reserving it for C-suite or, you know, upper level managers that are in a special leadership track, but really making it on demand, available and dynamic for them in the moment. Because if you've got people that are seeking to learn, you want to fulfill that promise to them and help them be the best that they can be on a daily basis.
Awesome. Thank you, Dr. Eric. So much great advice, so many clear tips. I always really enjoy your wisdom on whatever topic we touch on. We are at the end of our session, so thank you all so much for joining us. And Dr. Eric, if you would like to just bring us to a close with some words of wisdom or a practice of your choice, that'd be great.
Yes, I thank you very much, Celine. I enjoyed it today. I think for today, you know, I encourage people to go back to our early meditation. Change is in the air. Change happens every moment, right? Every moment is an opportunity for change. And I find that, you know, when you're in a struggle, when you're looking for inspiration, when you're looking for a different point of view, you know, if you meditate and engage in some mindfulness and just relax in that moment and open yourself up to the opportunity of change, to see how you can change and to invoke the question to yourself what you are seeking, and that may be seeking you. That which you are seeking may actually seek you out in your meditation. So give that a shot, journal about it, keep up the good work, and see you at the top.